This media content is brought to you by Right Dream Productions. Large aspects of the narrative contained within this episode have been derived from the testimonies of witnesses and the conclusions of the Commission of Inquiry into the attempted coup in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on Friday, the 27th of July, 1990.
Right Dream Productions uses AI imaging in this content.
Dissatisfied with life in Trinidad and perplexed by unfairness, injustice, and corruption, Lennox Phillip left the TTPS and migrated to Canada, where he embraced Islam as a student and became Yassin Abu Bakr. Returning to Trinidad in 1978 with renewed purpose and newfound faith, the tall and charismatic Imam conveyed teachings of Islam from the Quran and the Hadith. Bakr's teachings elevated the important discipline of prayer, marriage, and family as a fundamental institution. Fasting, giving of alms, defending the poor and needy, the distancing of oneself from debauchery, rejecting vanity and forms of addiction, and fused these with black consciousness. His ability to draw on his knowledge of the country's history endeared him to anyone who would listen, and he derived pause even from those who dissented. He challenged discrimination and instructed those among the Jamaat to rise and to take their rightful place within the society. In 1969, a predecessor institution to which the Jamaat eventually networked and is stated to have belonged, the Islamic Missionary Guild, was given assurances of 8 acres of land at No. 1 Mucurapo Road to develop as an Islamic educational and cultural hub. In fact, the permanent secretary at the time wrote to the Guild providing formal permission to construct their center. However, legal title to the land was never conferred. This is a critical point that will be revisited. Frustrated by the slow pace at which the process was developing, or not, the Guild eventually abandoned the project and moved elsewhere. However, the Jamaat remained and chose to focus on its growing membership of mostly Afro-Trinidadians who emanated largely from the East-West Corridor. The East-West Corridor is a term of reference coined by eminent scholar Dr. Lloyd Best to homogenize communities stretching from the royal chartered borough of Arima in the east to the city of Port of Spain in the northwest. It includes, but is not limited to, Aruca, Tunapuna, St. Augustine, St. Joseph, Curep, San Juan, Barataria, and the 53 heterogeneous communities that comprise of Laventille. As the 1980s progressed, the Jamaat implemented a drug rehabilitation program. This program also focused on ex-offenders. This position enabled the Jamaat to acquire an understanding of who drug dealers and drug traffickers were, crucially understanding their areas of operation, their modus operandi, and the channels of their money. It also allowed them to gauge the costly societal impact of the narcotics trade's profit margin. This situation placed the Jamaat in direct conflict with these stakeholders and the TTPS, including corrupt persons within its ranks who moonlighted as police. And in anticipation of reprisals, they needed to be armed. According to a special branch report, which was disclosed to the Commission of Inquiry into July 27th, dated 3rd of August 1988, Jamaat members visited a well-known drug dealer at his home in Cedros, and they discussed the acquisition of arms and ammunition for use by the Jamaat. One member asked for high-powered rifles before the end of August to be used against drug dealers. Membership grew in size. It became a place of refuge for deportees from North America, ex-convicts, the invisible of Trinidad, and those that the society either rejected or was incapable of meaningfully engaging. Despite being met with resistance and at times being denied funding locally, the Jamaat continued educational and literacy programs. Abu Bakr was able to obtain funding and medical supplies from Libya through his direct connection with Libyan leader and Pan-Africanist Colonel Gaddafi. After all, he stayed in Libya as a guest of Gaddafi when he was a student. As previously mentioned, the Guild eventually abandoned its plans for the No. 1 Mucurapo road lands as bureaucracy, a seemingly inherent condition of doing business in Trinidad, stymied their attempts. Despite occupying the property, which by then was mostly swamp and mangrove, the Islamic Missionaries Guild did not construct permanent structures on the Mucurapo lands. Bakr and the Jamaat, however, chose to stay. This turn of events informed the perception by many that the Jamaat had no legal claim to the property, since proponents have asserted that it was not promised to the Jamaat, but rather to the Guild. According to the Commission, in or about 1979, the Jamaat built a primary school for their children and others on the lands, named the Madrasa al-Muslimin. In 1981, the school was registered as a private school, and in 1982 had 98 students enrolled. The school's secretary, Mrs. Anisa Abu Bakr, the wife of Imam Yassin Abu Bakr, applied for grants and funding for the 8 teachers. 6 of those teachers were full-time but were not salaried and were only in receipt of a stipend of $100 for transport costs. Mrs. Bakr made an application for funding for the construction of toilets and 2 water tanks. The Ministry of Education, however, rejected the application. On the 15th of November 1984 and the 12th of September 1985, the Jamaat applied to the Ministry of Education for registration of a secondary school, Madrasa al-Muslimin Private Secondary School. On the 3rd of April 1986, approval for registration was granted with registration number 920 provided. On the 21st of September 1986, the principal, Kibwe Atiba, wrote to the ministry requesting all the necessary information available for private secondary schools, so as to enable us to fulfill the relevant requirements of your ministry and to take advantage of whatever opportunities and facilities are available to us. The school also expressed its desire of participating in CXC and GCE examinations in 1987 in math, English language, Spanish, geography, chemistry, physics, and biology. Here we see that the Jamaat is going in the direction of having its academic institutions fully licensed. Many of these attempts by the Jamaat to obtain funding is typical for denominational schools. Theirs, however, were frequently denied and may give rise to claims of persecution by the state. However, the Jamaat's schools were not, and subsequent to July 27th, considered to be denominational schools. A school, if determined to be denominational, qualifies for the Ministry of Education's funding. This complication, however, cannot be viewed in isolation, since the issue of the land and claims of illegal occupation remained. Regarding the geographical layout, Justice Brooks provides clarity in his comprehensive judgment in a matter relating to the state and the Jamaat that there were 2 parcels of land at No. 1 Mucurapo Road, which occurred in separate and distinct forms of ownership. The front portion which consists of 1.5 hectares and abuts Mucurapo Road, this parcel belongs to the City Council. Then there is the back portion, measuring 1.9 hectares, owned by the state. These two parcels are separated by the sewerage trunk reserve. The Jamat's position as having a legitimate claim to the land was eventually accepted by the City Corporation. The City Corporation invited Abu Bakr and the Jamat to initiate the legal process by way of offering them a lease of what the city deemed an appropriate portion. Bakr, possibly believing that he was being duped into accepting a lesser size, decided to ignore invitations to meet as well as commencing the process. Consequently, in the eyes of the law, the Jamat were squatters, illegally occupying lands belonging to the Port of Spain City Corporation. The added complication here, however, was that a mosque had been built on land long earmarked for such. Abu Bakr and the Jamat proceeded to expand construction, and the City Corporation, in response, sought relief from the courts. By December of 1984, Justice Macmillan granted the injunction restricting construction and ordered that newly erected structures be demolished. Abu Bakr, in defiance, ramped up construction, and by the time the matter was heard before Justice Permanand in January of 1985, he was found to be in contempt of court. A tense atmosphere resulted as the police sought to enforce the court's order to detain Bakr. A contingent of officers descended on the Jamat's compound as angry men, terrified women and children gathered around Bakr. Critics have argued that he used the women and children whom he led as human shields. The situation ended peacefully as the party of officers left without Abu Bakr in custody. While then, Minister of National Security John Donaldson commended the police for their restraint in the situation, but this position was heavily criticized by several quarters, notably the Mayor of Port of Spain, the Law Association, Trinidad Guardian, and former Minister of Home Affairs, Dr. Patrick Solomon, all concluding that it was a breakdown of law and order. Attention was shifted as Pope John Paul II's February 1985 visit was just around the corner, and Dr. Selwyn Ryan, in his 1991 article, The Trigger, pulled in the name of Almighty Allah, stated that Minister Donaldson justified his response in his letter to the Commissioner that he was not only trying to avoid bloodshed, but also the potentially embarrassing optics of confronting a religious group, possibly owing to the Pope's anticipated visit. Abu Bakr was eventually arrested and served 21 days in prison. On December 20th, 1985, Mr. Abdullah Hossein of the Guild wrote to City Corporation clerk, stating that the Jamat were bona fide members of the Guild to whom the land had been granted in 1969. He urged the City Corporation to finalize the long outstanding matter without further delay. The then president of the Guild, Masjid Ali, also signed a joint letter with Abu Bakr to confirm that the Jamat were Guild members. However, there was dissent, as some members of the Guild held the view that Mr. Ali's position was wrong and that the Jamat never attended Guild meetings nor identified itself with it in any way. Raitza Khan, a member of the Guild, allegedly criticized dissenting members by defending the Jamat as true Muslims who practiced in accordance with Islam. Further, that the land was made for the propagation of Islam and not for any single group. Khan encouraged the Guild to defer to Saudi Arabia for guidance on the matter. The unsettled matter of the land, however, continued well into another administration as the coalition party, the National Alliance for Reconstruction, the NAR, stormed into power with an overwhelming victory, marking another pivotal moment in the trajectory of the Republic. What is not known to many is that the Jamaat supported the NAR during its campaign, as it joined in the national outrage against the PNM. As we will come to realize in other episodes, the Jamaat also campaigned for the UNC and the PNM in subsequent years. This is because the Jamaat's political affiliations were to secure recognition of the school and the Mucurapo land. This treatment of the Jamaat is not exclusive to them, since history reminds us that the Hindu and particularly the Baptist community under the colonial governments also had to fight for recognition and establishment. The Jamaat, however, was experiencing this at the hands of its very own government in a post-colonial Trinidad.